Hi, I'm Sarah Via, professor and climate extension specialist at the University of Maryland. And tonight I want to share with you some ideas I've been thinking about on climate change. This talk has two parts. The first part, no time for gloom and doom. There's been a lot of bad news out there, but I want to discuss some reasons for hope in spite of all that news. And in the second part of the talk, I'll discuss some ideas that I've been having about how we can generate very rapid climate action, in fact, an epidemic of climate action. So let's get going. So here's the bad news. It's clear we are not cutting emissions fast enough. We've got all kinds of social and political barriers to that, and we're just not making quick enough progress. Here's a graph showing global greenhouse gas emissions, the magnitude, the historical emissions path, of course, increasing. Here's the present up to 2020. And these curves on the right show the outcomes of various scenarios of emissions. So this blue cloud here is the trajectory of emissions under current policies and actions. If we look at the black line here, this is the trajectory under 2030 targets. That's going to lead us to 2.4 degrees centigrade increase, various pledges and actions. Here's an optimistic scenario. These, in fact, are all sort of things that we think might happen given current goal setting by various governments. But this green shape here is what we need. We need to reduce emissions immediately and very, very rapidly in order to curb the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees C, or even better, a little less than that. This red arrow shows us that we've got a gap between what the pledges that countries have already committed to and what we need. And this is not just an emissions gap, it's an ambition gap and a motivation gap. So we really need to turn this around in a way. I do want to back up. This is progress, okay, because emissions could be increasing, like this. So all of these are progress. We just need a little more progress. In order to make that happen, we need an epidemic of climate action. And that's what the second part of this talk will concern. The good news is I think there is actually plenty of room for optimism. There have been a number of reports from the UN, et cetera, that have really sketched out a very dire set of predictions given the changes that are already occurring. However, I think that we can still turn this around. The UN, even the IPCC, still thinks we can turn this around. So here are four little bits of good news that I'll discuss. First, more people are starting to care about climate change. That makes a difference. Second, there's more help out there for people who want to act but aren't sure how. So when we have people motivated to act but they don't know what to do, that's not going to translate into action. So we need to give people ideas about how they can act effectively. Third, there are more really good ideas and solutions that are appearing out there now. And these are things that we know how to do and that will actually work to help curb climate change. And fourth, we're beginning to see how people power, that is the power of social behavior, can change the projected outcomes of the kinds of climate models that we've been relying on. So I firmly believe that we, and that's the collective we, everyone who's watching this webinar, can cause the kind of epidemic of climate action that we need. So let's talk about these pieces of good news for a minute. The first one, more people are starting to care. The folks at the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication and the George Mason Center for Climate Change Communication have been surveying people across the US since 2008 about their views on various aspects of climate change. And in accordance with the results that they've received from those surveys, they've been able to partition Americans into 6 groups, which they call global warming's 6 Americans. The top set of bubbles shows the average viewpoints of people across America from 2017 to 2021. So these are pretty recent, but not the most recent. And the 6 Americas are first, the alarmed. These are folks who are really knowledgeable about climate change and very worried about it and want to do something. The concerned, these folks realize that climate change is a problem, and they are sort of beginning to think about doing something about it. The cautious, these folks are aware of climate change. They're sort of cautiously concerned, and they are, moderately motivated to do something. Then we have the disengaged. These are folks who just have other things on their plate and really can't be bothered at the moment. The doubtful, these folks aren't really sure what to think, and they're not convinced that there's a problem. And then the downright dismissive, these are the hardcore climate deniers. And I want to point out that there are really, especially in November 2021, there are not that many people out there who are outright dismissive, outright deniers, 9% of the US population, that they have received a way outsized amount of attention on the airwaves. In fact, by November 2021, we've got 58% of the population in America who are either alarmed, ready to do something, or concerned. And what we've seen from 2017 to November 21 is a sort of progression of this group from cautious through concern over to alarmed. So 19%, 17%, we're moving more people over into this category. This category is the most motivated to do something. They're the most concerned. They are ready for action. This is the category of people that are going to make something change. Okay, now the another bit of information from the Yale climate program and the George Mason folks is that, and this again is using the average from 2017 to 2021, is that if you take the alarmed, which was 24% of the US population during this period, about a third of those folks are already active in some kind of advocacy, and another almost 50% is willing to do some advocacy, but they're not exactly sure what to do, okay? Only 20% of this group is alarmed but not doing anything, okay? So what we've got is a lot of people who are willing to take action. And now our question is how to further motivate, educate and motivate the willing to know what to do and the inactive to become willing to do something. So that's a large part of what I'll be discussing. Secondly, there's more help out there on the internet for people who want to do something in their individual lives or participate in advocacy, but they're not sure what to do. A great source is Project Drawdown. They have an awful lot of information that allows people to increase their knowledge, not just about climate change and how it works, but also about solutions. Project Drawdown is offering a free online course called Climate Solutions 101, and that is comprised of 6 video lectures, all free. And you can see there are different topics of these lectures. But by the time you've watched all 6 of these, you have a really pretty good idea of the sorts of solutions that we can implement to curb climate change. And there are a ton of other resources on the Drawdown website, which is shown here. Secondly, I recently came across this website from the Science Moms, which of course attracted me immediately since I'm a science mom, although I'm not participating in this website. The Science Moms have figured out 4 ways to help. Well, these are not new ways, but they've developed these resources. And the 4 ways are share, talk, join, and write. And they have a whole website with a lot of information about these 4 ways to help, and a lot of other information as well. So I would urge you to go to this, the Science Moms website, just Google Science Moms. Next, I came across this site called The Jump, which offers daily support and motivation to help you understand and implement 6 shifts in behavior that will help reduce climate change, and also sort of remobilize our attitudes away from I will be happy if I buy this thing to I can be happy by being outside, being with my friends, being with my family without a lot of consumption. So they have 6 sort of general categories of behavior shifts. One is and they've named them sort of short and sweet things, but really the first one, and clutter, is about reducing consumption. Travel fresh means reduce your use of personal vehicles as much as you can, and that will reduce climate emissions from transportations. Eat green, move to a plant-based diet as much as you can, and try to reduce food waste. Dress retro, this is in recognition of the very high climate impact of the sort of fast fashion industry. This, when they talk about this, they'll help you sort of reduce your consumption of these, kind of throwaway fashion. Holiday local, this is reducing transportation emissions. And change the system. These are sets of behaviors that will actually nudge the system and change things for all of us. So I decided to sign up for this, takethejump.org. And the next day I received this email. Hello, Sarah. For the first 6 days of your jump, we will be sharing helpful information on each of the 6 shifts, including what each shift is, guidance to help you with trying it, and background on why it's important. So this is very important. First, remember, it's enough just to try. So even if you can't do everything, or you can't do each behavior perfectly every time, it's really important to just start doing something and try your best. So they recognize that, and I think that's very, very important. So the rest of this slide is about the first behavior shift and clutter. And they are focusing on this day about reducing consumption of electronics. So what the science says, keep electronic products for at least 7 years. And while taking the jump, try to keep the phone you have and avoid buying new electronics. You know how much the phone companies want you to buy a new phone every 2 years, right? They are on you all the time once you've paid for that phone. And yet, most of the time, your phone is perfectly good for quite a long period after that, especially now the phones are so advanced. So before you buy something new, here's what they suggest. Check yourself. Next time you think you're thinking of getting a new phone or other item, just pause to think whether you need one. In fact, whenever you pull out that credit card, just think, do I really need this? A lot of times the answer will be, well, not really. So, we try to teach our kids how to distinguish between what we need and what we want, but sometimes as adults, we sort of forget about that and just, buy whatever we are able to. And that is not a good or climate-friendly strategy. So ask yourself, before I buy something new, can I fix the thing I have already? Can I borrow something, or can I buy secondhand? And one thing I like about this particular site is that it helps people understand every day you can be a part of something important. You can make a difference, and here's how we're going to help you. So I like that. And finally, in terms of online places where you can learn how to take action, I really like this Climate Change Makers site. I have not participated in this yet, but I am planning to. What they are doing is basically lining people up, getting people involved in taking 1 hour of climate action every week. You join them for an hour, and then you do something, call people or whatnot. They are basically trying to connect people who want to do something with doing something that's effective. So their point is very similar to what the Yale program said. 28% of Americans are waiting to be asked to take political action on climate. Okay, so these are not just individual actions. This is actually taking political action. And they will help you by connecting you with people and actions to take. So I think that's worth trying. Again, here's their website. Okay, the next one. There are a lot of really good ideas out there and solutions. And I am so gratified to know that there are a lot of very smart people out there in the world who are working on this. We're not stuck with, the same old. And the idea I'm most excited about right now is electrify everything. That means electrify our homes, stop burning fossil fuels in our furnaces, change to heat pumps, electrify transportation, et cetera. So it turns out that the reason that this works is that burning fossil fuels first to generate electricity and run vehicles is very inefficient. What do I mean by that? So if we have, here's a coal-fired power plant, 60% of the energy that is in the coal or in the gas, in a gas-fired power plant, is wasted as heat. It doesn't become electricity. It just is burned off as heat, goes up the smokestacks. Only 40% of the energy that was in that fossil fuel, the chemical energy, is converted to electrical energy. That's super wasteful, okay? And here's some more information about that. Secondly, so that's electricity generation with coal or natural gas, only 40% efficient. Powering vehicles with gasoline is even less efficient than that. And that's because when you pump gas into your car, it contains all this chemical energy of the fossil fuels. But when you burn that fossil fuel in your internal combustion engine, it's very, very inefficient. Only 20 to 30%, 12 to 30% of it actually goes into moving the car or the truck down the road. Most of it is lost as heat, again, out the engine, out the tailpipe, whatever. Very, very inefficient. However, if we power our homes and our vehicles with electricity, there is no more conversion, right? And so we don't have to burn a fossil fuel in our vehicle. We plug in and we go right from the electrons in the in the electricity line into power in our vehicle. This is why it costs 3 to 4 cents a mile to move your electric vehicle down the road versus 14 to 20 cents per mile for a gas vehicle, because you're not losing that energy. This is even true if you have to power the electric vehicle off of electricity you generate from a dirty coal or not very efficient coal or gas-fired power plant. However, it's even better. This is the future that is really going to be great. It's even better if we can power our cars, buildings, and factories with clean, renewable energy generated from wind and solar. So the windmill or these solar panels use wind or solar, infinitely renewable, to generate electricity. Okay, then you fire that into your electric vehicle. There's no conversion loss. Electrons generated, electrons used, no conversion loss, super efficient. It turns out if we increase efficiency this way, by generating clean power and using it in electric homes and vehicles, we will only need about 1/2 of the energy that we need right now when we are buying and burning fossil fuels. The bonus, of course, is we won't be polluting the air with toxic chemicals that are released when we burn coal for power. We won't be releasing methane from pipelines used to take gas to natural gas electric power plants. We'll have cleaner water and we'll have better health. A lot of deaths are caused every year by air pollution from generating electricity, even in the US. For those of you who might be almost as old as me and remember the VW minibus, which was a big thing when I was in college, of course, this is just the new, it hasn't even been released, the new VW minibus electric. Okay, so back to the future here. There's a ton more information about electrifying everything on this website, rewiringamerica.org, or in Saul Griffith's book called Electrify, which I can greatly recommend. Okay, there's one more big bonus if we can power our cars, buildings, and factories with electricity from wind and solar. We won't need oil and gas from nations, non-democratic nations, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Russia, okay? Right now, these nations are essentially holding the world hostage because we need their fuel. If we have this, we can say, hey, we don't need your fossil fuel anymore. So Bill McKibben's written a great article that was picked up by the Washington Post, but he basically calls it heat pumps for peace and freedom. And his idea, which is really a great idea, I think, is to use American manufacturing and labor to build and install heat pumps in Europe, to free Europeans from the need for Russian oil and gas. Okay, this is, of course, during the Ukraine invasion by Russia. And so here, just you can imagine this: two American workers in England installing a heat pump or somewhere else in Europe. And this idea is great, not just because of the sort of political ramifications, but also because U.S. manufacturing, the manufacturing industry would get contracts to build a lot of heat pumps. That would be great. And we could send U.S. workers abroad to learn how to install these things. So we would get manufacturing contracts and job training. So heat pumps for peace. All right. I want to turn now for the rest of the talk to discussing that last bit of optimism, which is that we're discovering the power of social behavior to drive change in a way that's faster than we think it's going to happen. So I'll give you a little background about how we think about behavior and change. Our perception in general is that everything is moving, not just our behavior, but sort of progress in general is moving at a sort of more or less linear or constant pace. So in this little cartoon, this is just progress over time. And so here's this, cartoon person thinking, oh man, things are changing really slow. I am never going to get to where I need to go on this trajectory. So here's where we think we're going to end up in the future, because we think that things are proceeding at a constant rate of change. But actually what happens is we get a much faster change than we thought, because many processes, including behavioral processes, are not linear. They are exponential or multiplicative. That is, things multiply to produce change rather than just adding up. And so this is, I think, a picture that's worth remembering. We think we're going here, but actually we wind up way up here, much more progress than we expected. And these folks call this the exponential growth surprise factor. I call it the miracle of exponential growth. So let's think about this a little bit more. There are many examples of exponential change in human societies, and adoption of new technology, for example, is a great one. This is times at 1400, okay, up to 2050. And what we can see is that, we had appearance of printing press, telescope, other things are happening, of course, in here, steam engine, and things are, the pace of technological change, which is on this axis, is pretty slow. But then, around the 1950s, things really start to happen fast. And that's because each new invention facilitated several other inventions. And this sort of multiplied instead of adding up. And because it multiplied, it led to exponential growth, okay, a rapid turn upward in the availability of technology. And I think we're all aware of this, microprocessors, word processors, the Apple Macintosh, and then on and on and on, very, very, very rapidly. Okay, so behaviors can also be multiplicative. So here's, a person, they got a new iPhone. Well, they are so excited about this iPhone. So that this person tells two friends, hey, I got a new iPhone. Then each friend tells two other friends, because they go get their iPhone. Hey, I got a new iPhone. I got a new iPhone. On and on and on. This is multiplicative. She has affected two people. Each one of those has affected two people. Each one of those has affected two people. That leads to exponential growth. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. Even just between 2008 and 2012, if you carried this on, we'd be way up here by now in terms of smartphone uptake. Okay. So multiplicative processes, that is, You talk to two people, they talk to two people, they talk to two people, that multiplies. That produces exponential change. Now, if this picture, let's go back to this graph. If this picture looks familiar, it should, because I modified it from this graph of how diseases spread. Okay, so diseases spread based on what they call this fundamental number, R0 or R0. And that is the number of people that each person infects. So if you have one patient, this patient infects two people. They each infect two people. This is an average now. They each infect two people on average. So that R0 is how many how many other people each person infects, okay? So the more other people each person infects, the more contagious a disease is. So here's a picture of various diseases. Hepatitis C, R0 equals 2, Ebola 2, HIV 4, SARS, that's the respiratory virus in the class that COVID is in, 4, mumps 10, measles very contagious 18. Okay, on average, each person who has measles infects 18 other people if they're not inoculated. So COVID comes along, and the first COVID strains that we had, R0 was around 2. Okay, pretty much like hepatitis or Ebola. That's still enough to generate exponential growth, but Delta came along later, R0 is 5.8. Wow, instead of on average infecting 2 people, now each person with Delta was infecting on average nearly 6 people. Omicron, R0 equals 7. So it was more contagious and was spreading more quickly. So this produced, even when R0 was 2, anytime R0 is more than 1, you get an exponential growth. So what does this look like? The more people each person infects or affects, if we're thinking of behavior, the faster the change. So here's a picture I found on the internet from a model that this person made. And this gives us a picture of why exponential growth is so surprising. Initially, this is the number of cases. Initially, and this is the model that this person did, things are moving so slowly. Each one this is a day, so slowly that people are going, yeah, hey, this is no problem. We recognize when COVID first came into the US that, in New York, the cases were growing very rapidly, but most people weren't seeing this. And even in New York for a while, it was so slow until we get to the point where exponential growth is really starting to have an impact. And that's we move from the no problem phase, hey, why is this a problem, to the oh bleep phase where, wow, all of a sudden cases are increasing like mad. So this is if R0 equals 6 versus R equals 2.7. This is my little drawing. Sorry, it's very messy, but it gives you the idea that even after cases start to increase, it's a little slower when R0 is closer to 2 than it is when R0 is 6. Okay, the more people each person has an impact on, the faster the change. So let's talk about exponential behavior change. This is very similar to that little cartoon I drew initially. This is the number of people acting on climate change on the vertical axis and over time. And initially, behavior change seems linear, as I described. It doesn't even have to be this great of a slope. It could be even closer to this, okay? But it's much slower than you expect and hope. And so people are disappointed initially, because here's a problem. How come we're not solving it? How come, the cases of COVID are still increasing so fast? How come climate change is still increasing so fast and we're not taking rapid enough action? This is the disappointment phase. However, at some point, because most of the time these behaviors or the disease, the epidemics, as I was discussing, are in fact multiplicative and lead to exponential growth, we get to the point where, whoa, things start to change really, really fast. Okay. Now, I'm not exactly sure where we are on this point here, but we have not reached this point where people's behaviors are changing very fast. This place here where we start to recognize that, in fact, it's clear that the process isn't linear and things are really taking off is the tipping point. Okay. By this point, the process, which was exponential all along, but which we thought was linear, becomes obviously exponential and very rapid. Now, you're thinking, I've heard of the tipping point. And yeah, you probably have, because Malcolm Gladwell wrote a great book called The Tipping Point in 2000, subtitled How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference. So he writes in The Tipping Point, quote, "The world of the tipping point is a place where the unexpected becomes expected, where radical change is more than a possibility, it is a certainty." So he asks, what can we do to deliberately start and control positive change of our own? And this is what we need to do with climate action. Deliberately start and control positive, exponential change of our own. Okay, now what affects the tipping point? Here's Malcolm Gladwell's take on this. And I think this is a pretty good place for us to start thinking about behavior with respect to increasing climate action. There's three things that Malcolm Gladwell thinks are really important in determining the tipping point. One, the law of the few. That means some people have an outsized social influence. People with large social networks are able to affect a lot of other people. People who have extra knowledge or some super persuasive manner, a sort of personal charisma, are able to influence a lot more people than the average person. So the law of the few. Even though the R0 is an average, some people will affect 1,000 people. Some people will affect 2 people. Some people have an outsized social influence. The second issue, as far as Malcolm Gladwell is concerned, is the stickiness of the message. That is, getting people to notice and remember what you're trying to get them to do, or what the sort of behavior change you're trying to influence. And I think in World War II, I was not around then, but the whole idea of Rosie the Riveter, and everyone's seen that iconic picture of the woman with the bicep, victory gardens, we can do it. The idea that people were contributing to the public good, even though they had to ration, they had to grow their food in victory gardens. It was a public mobilization effort, and people remembered it and got involved in it. Finally, the power of context. It turns out that behavior depends on the environment. There's a lot of feedbacks between how people act and what they're experiencing from the environment. And I think when it comes to climate change, we know this already, as the climate worsens, more people are becoming alarmed and more people will become alarmed. And social norms are already changing, even though it doesn't seem like it. Okay, I think these are two really true things. So the tipping point, it's worth remembering. This picture comes from a paper that was published in 2020 in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Dr. Otto and her colleagues. And this is all about what she describes as social tipping interventions. That is, climate interventions that have the result of reducing the resistance to change. So a social epidemic of climate action will counteract this entrenched political resistance to change. So here's the way she visualizes it. Resistance to change is going up here. And so we're sort of sitting right here. Resistance to change decreased. We're sitting here, but in order to move forward, now if this is time, moving forward, we've got to go uphill, more resistance to change. And this is caused by powerful lobbies, entrenched habits, all kinds of external things that are keeping us at the status quo. The view from this paper, which is an excellent paper, is that if we can implement various social tipping interventions that will pull this resistance down and allow us to glide down here to the decarbonized state without staying stuck. Okay, so this is a cartoon, obviously, but the point is social tipping interventions can reduce that resistance. So what are these social tipping interventions? This is from her paper. It's a really complicated paper, and I'm still digesting all of it. But I just want to point out 2 of the 6 classes of social tipping interventions that they discuss. First, our education. Okay. And the second is behavioral norms and values. And these are really important because these are very key for sort of activating people power. Okay. And getting to that social tipping point. The education system, of course, as more people understand what climate change is about and how we solve it, et cetera, that has important feedbacks that allows people to influence corporations to, for example, disclose their greenhouse gas emissions, or it influences people to recognize that, whoa, here we are, we're causing climate change. There are some moral implications to this if we believe that humans are stewards of the environment, et cetera. So education can improve our recognition that there are moral implications of what we are doing, and this can change social norms, that is the expected forms of behavior. We can go from, hey, let's just use all the fossil fuels we can, to maybe this is not such a great thing to do because we're having a bad impact on the world. This can allow people to change policies as a positive feedback, removing the trillions of dollars of fossil fuel subsidies, which is propping up the fossil fuel industry, decentralizing energy generation using renewables and microgrids, et cetera. Another feedback is changing policy. Once people change social norms, recognize there's a moral implication of using fossil fuels, then they want to change policy. So that involves things like affecting the financial market. So there's a lot of feedbacks involved. I just want you to get the general idea that people can affect what happens by changing their own ideas about things, learning and changing their ideas until social norms change. It's not okay anymore to just consume everything, to burn fossil fuels, to drive a big gas guzzling car, et cetera. Okay. Again, this is a graph from Otto and colleagues' paper in 2020. And they show, I changed the axis to just make it a little bit bigger here, percent change in carbon emissions per year from 1930 to 2060, where we're just sort of going up and down. If we stick with business as usual, that's this red path, there's not going to be a whole lot of change in emissions. In fact, they're probably going to increase, and that's going to lead to a large temperature change, almost 5 degrees centigrade. That's a lot. These 3 representative concentration pathways. I may not have that right. These are the scenarios that have been modeled most by climate modelers. And, this one is sort of business as usual, a little bit better. They still result in more temperature increase than we really can withstand. But according to Otto, if we can implement some of these social tipping interventions, we can dramatically and rapidly increase emissions to the point that we can hold global temperature increase to 1 to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, 1 degree centigrade, we've already passed that. So our goal is to keep it below 1.5 degrees centigrade. But this is what they describe as the power of the social tipping interventions. Now, just this past week or so, a couple of weeks, this is March 2022, new climate models show the power of social behavior. Typical climate models, the ones we read about in all the reports in the National Climate Assessments, in the IPCC reports, these are based only on the physical world. They basically assume that people are going to continue the same unsustainable behavior that we've been doing, since the Industrial Revolution. And these new models by Francis Moore and her colleagues in Nature just published this spring, show that when you add social behavior and you get feedbacks between the physical world and the social world, like, for example, reducing emissions, so you get a reduction in climate change because emissions are going down, we get a really big impact on the final outcome. So what they did was they used accepted values for different parts of the models, and they ran their models 100,000 times. Okay, this is one great thing about climate models, is you can essentially simulate the future 100,000 times with different conditions. And their results clustered into 5 classes. So here are the outcomes. The modal path is the one that occurred most often. This is global emissions over time, okay? Business as usual is pretty much right up here, okay? Increasing emissions. 48% of the time, they found a pretty nice decline in global emissions. Not super rapid, but declining nonetheless. 28% of the time, that was this one, their path, which they call aggressive action, where governments were able to pull it together and act aggressively. We got fairly rapid reduction of emissions. This one is technical challenges. That is, governments tried to act aggressively, but they ran into technical problems. They couldn't get enough clean renewable energy generator. There were other technical problems that occurred 18% of the time. This one is delayed recognition, which means people sat around and didn't do anything until they finally figured out around 2050 that they better do something, and then they reduced emissions. That occurred 4% of the time. 2% of the time, they didn't really do very much. And so I am heartened that these two, which add up to what, 76% of all of their model runs showed pretty decent emissions reductions. So that is because social behavior tends to be multiplicative, and these feedbacks that occurred as more and more people were recognizing we needed to do something and were starting to affect climate policy, these increased climate action and sped up emissions reduction. So 48% of the time, again, as I discussed last time, we reduced emissions not quite fast enough to really keep the temperature increase where we needed it, okay? But much better than doing nothing, right? And 28% of the time, that's that aggressive pathway. The global temperature only was predicted to go up by 1.8 degrees centigrade. Still, neither of these is quite good enough, but it's a lot better than the predictions of not doing anything, okay? 4% of the time, 3.1 degree centigrade increase, 18% of the time, 3 degrees, 2% of the time, 3.6 degrees. Do nothing, that's business as usual, can be up to 4 degrees centigrade. So adding the power of social behavior, hey, we need to do something, can change policy enough so that we can get rapid climate action. And, even if it's not that rapid, we can get some decent climate action. So the power of behavior. Now, who's going to start all this tipping? Okay. It turns out, like Malcolm Gladwell recognized, that people who have high level of social power, the power of the few, can change others and affect policy. And social power depends on a combination of income and what's called social agency, okay? So let's look at the percent of the global population in various income categories, okay? And I don't care really what you call these categories, but if we look at the purple box, this is the top 10% of global income. These folks are responsible for half of the carbon emissions, okay? 10% of the top 10% of global income, 50% of the carbon emissions. So these folks have a big responsibility. They have caused most of the carbon emissions. In fact, the super rich are even, more responsible for carbon emissions with their yachts and their private jets than, the next 9.5%. And these folks also tend to have very high social agency, okay? So what do you have to make in the US to be in the top percent of global income? It turns out about $75,000 a year is the bottom of this top 10% bracket. The super rich, $400,000 a year. Okay, this is now the global top 0.5%, $400,000 a year, US. Of course, most of these people make far more than that. The next group, responsible for 19% of the emissions, can have moderate to high social agency. And this is, bottom of this is making $45,000 a year. Now, I would sort of suggest that these folks are not as responsible as this group. Okay, this 10% is, only making a fraction of the emissions of this group. And this group and the global poverty level in the US is $32,000 a year for a family of four. All the income groups below it. These folks are not really making a lot of carbon emissions. Now, some of them are interested in participating and want to participate and are mobilized and motivated to participate. But honestly, I think most of these categories need, instead of being asked to help stop the problem that they didn't cause, I think they need help boosting their adaptation and resilience. So, this is a transitional category, but I would put most of the responsibility for action on this top 10% globally. That's responsible for a lot of the emissions. So we can accelerate climate action by informing and mobilizing the people with high social influence, who, by the way, are also most responsible for the problem. Now, who are these social influencers? They show up and make a difference, okay? They are the 200,000 people who marched in Washington, D.C., the 500,000 people who marched in New York in the People's Climate March. They are the people who vote. They are the people who show up for public meetings and testify in their local, state, or county government. Again, more people showing up for meetings, more people out in the streets protesting, more people calling their legislatures. These are people like you, people who, many of you already do these things. These are sort of low budget things to do in terms of social advocacy, but they add up and they make a difference. So I will end by just asking you this question. What is your climate action R0? That is, how many people can you infect with the motivation for action? So let's look at this picture again. Instead of iPhones, now this person's saying, hey, let's talk about how we can stop climate change. And she talks to two people. Each one of those persons has two friends. Hey, let's talk about how we can stop climate change. Hey, let's talk about how we can stop climate change. Before you know it, you've got a lot of people talking about it, a lot of people interested in it, a lot of people calling their legislatures. This is how we get to the social tipping point. So when we talk to other people and we motivate them and we educate them, this turns individual actions into a social movement, which causes policy change. We can't do it by just turning our thermostats down at home, by just changing our diet. We need to have changes in policy. So the People's Climate March, I think it was in 2016, the picture I showed you of the 500,000 people in New York, they said, to change everything, we need everyone. And I will add, we need you. We need you to talk to your friends, to talk to your family, to really start to talk about it and share what you're doing. Because when you talk to people and say, well, I'm doing these things at home, you don't have to be braggy or self-righteous or anything about it, but you have a bigger impact if you're actually doing something yourself. So I am excited about this, and I will be working on these ideas more, but I feel optimistic that we can reach that social tipping point and get the action that we need within the next 5, 10, 15 years. Thanks so much. I will put some links down in the description of the video to my website, to a link to sign up for my newsletter so that you can keep yourself aware of different webinars that I'll be offering or other information that I might have to provide. So till next time, thanks so much. Bye-bye.